Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Tensions are rising on NATO's eastern flank after a Russian fighter jet violated Estonia's airspace while the Estonian military attempted to intercept one of Moscow's Shadow Fleet tankers in the Baltic Sea. The incident took place as the EU is working on a sanctions package aimed at countering the activities of Russia's Shadow Fleet. The 17th sanctions package is presented as the toughest one yet and includes over 200 individuals suspected of operating Russia's murky Shadow Fleet vessels, as well as those accused of human rights violations. How effective do we expect these sanctions to be, and what chance do they have of bringing a belligerent Putin to the negotiating table? Well, to help us out on this, we're joined by David Tannenbaum, partner Sanctions and Maritime Intelligence, Polestar Global. Hello and welcome to TVP World. Thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
So it's a pleasure. So how would you characterize the situation on the Baltic at the moment in terms of the tension between the Shadow Fleet, the Russian military, and NATO?
I think it's a pretty tense situation. The vessel that the Estonians tried to intercept is one of the core Shadow Fleet vessels. It belongs to a large company that maintains another 59 engaged in sanctions evasion. And the fact that Russia was willing to use military force to prohibit that visit, board search and seizure is an alarming trend.
But I mean, surely this cannot be allowed to continue. I mean, I know the sanctions on the Shadow Fleet haven't yet come into force, but nonetheless, doesn't Estonia have any legal right to divert this ship, stop it from getting into Russia?
Absolutely. And one of the concerns with this vessel is the insurance it carries. It's not just that the vessel's engaged in sanctions evasion. It's also sort of an environmental ticking time bomb that it's not properly insured, it's not properly classed. And one of the EU's main objectives also with this new package is to be able to stop vessels that don't have adequate insurance, that present not just a sanctions, but also a safety risk to its member states as well.
Yeah, but that's no good if the vessel doesn't stop, as happened in this case.
Correct. I mean, and it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the coalition and NATO responds. Estonia is not the only actor that can operate in the Baltics. It happens to be very close to Russia and within intercept range for something like a Su-35. However, we also have other options as to where we may stop it, whether that's near Denmark in the Straits or when it's crossing the United Kingdom as well.
Understood. Now, what's taken, what's taken so long getting this 17th sanctions package into place? I mean, the Shadow Fleet isn't new, is it? It's been around ever since sanctions started, just about. Why now?
Yeah, so there's three main sanctions authorities, right? There's the US, the UK, and then the EU. To have the EU cobble together a sanctions package, they have to get the input from all of their member states. So that's why their sanctions tend to go out as packages as opposed to individual daily designations. But if you look at something like what the UK is doing, even this week, they didn't just designate certain Shadow Fleet operators and under the radar traders of Russian crude, but they also went after several of their P&I clubs as well that provide insurance to the Shadow Fleet. So it's really just a matter of building consensus within the EU and creating a package that they can get out the door. But it takes longer than, say, its other coalition counterparts.
Okay, now, I mentioned in the introduction there are 200 individuals connected directly to the Shadow Fleet that are on this sanctions list. Who are these people and how will that stop the flow of illicit oil?
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see which fleets they go after. There's about 250 vessels that are operated across 8 companies that we believe are engaged in price cap evasion. And that doesn't include some of the smaller fleet operators that may be operating 1 or 2 or 3 vessels. typically when a vessel falls under sanctions, it loses its ability to do certain things. If you want to refuel the vessel, what we call bunkering, so that it can continue to operate, well, that bunker provider has to agree that they're going to deal with you. So if they're also following sanctions, it pushes them to these further corners of the maritime world, have them rely on less reputable actors, but also hopefully kind of moves them out of the international financial system.
OK, now, the sanctions thus far haven't really stopped Putin's war. Do you think this one will?
I think it all comes down to enforcement. The problem when it comes to EU sanctions is that you have multiple countries and each one has a different enforcement priority. Some countries, such as we can see with Estonia, are much more proactive than other countries. I do think if the EU starts targeting also some of their enablers, there are certain flag states out there that seem to be primarily or exclusively catering to the dark fleet, as well as insurance companies, then that starts to sort of take away that infrastructure that the dark fleet relies upon. So it's really going to depend on what the package looks like, how far they're going to go with it, and if it's just going to be vessels that may take an individual vessel out of circulation that can be replaced, or if it's the much harder to replace infrastructure that the shadow fleet relies upon.
OK, now moving slightly away from the fleet itself, Russia's moving military assets close to the border with Finland. It's one of its fighter jets actually went into Estonian airspace. How well is NATO prepared to protect this part of the Baltic Sea?
I think it's very well positioned. Obviously, Russia is in a tough spot with Ukraine, so I have doubts on how much power they could actually project in this area or if it's just posturing. I do think that even without U.S. support, we have very strong NATO members that are prepared to turn the Baltic into essentially what we would call a NATO lake. We have very robust surface and subsurface assets, and particularly the further Russia gets away from their domain and further into the Baltics, they could project less power even with air assets as well. So.
OK. Now, in terms of the cables that were running under the Baltics, which have been cut, and according to some estimates, there are about 15 of them in all that have been cut. What's the situation with those? Have they been repaired and returned to service? And how will they be protected going forward?
Yeah, so I can't speak as to the current status of the cables. I'm just not knowledgeable on that. But the current plan to protect them, we've started seeing even the use of unmanned drone vessels that are being used by, I think it was Norway, to protect it. It will require a maritime mission. It will require assets in that area to identify any vessels that may, say, choose to drag their anchor. And I think this is where the intelligence collection is very important to identify these dark fleet vessels, because there are concerns that not only they may be shipping crude oil and petroleum products for Russia, but they may be conducting other clandestine activities as well.
Yeah, but I mean, how much can the countries, the surrounding countries, actually do physically? Are they impotent? They might have the force of law behind them, but unless you've got some threats, some physical threats, you may not be able to stop them after all. What do you think?
Yeah, and that's what makes the situation that happened with the Estonian VBSS with the shadow fleet vessel so tricky, right? That EU members, have the legal responsibility to conduct boardings of vessels that may be engaged in this activity, to arrest them, to detain them, and to legally prosecute them. But if Russia is prepared to go to bat to use military assets to prevent that, I think that's the scary and unknown area that we're entering into.
Well, we shall be watching it with trepidation. David Tannenbaum, thank you very much indeed for sharing your analysis with our audience. Have a good day, sir.
You too.
Thank you. And that brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Stay tuned, though, lots more coming up. Goodbye.